Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen is being sued over a new policy that will force some asylum seekers to wait in Mexico. That policy, called Migrant Protection Protocols, is a departure from previous DHS policies, which allowed migrants to remain in the U.S. under supervision. But our Kate Smith writes that the American Civil Liberties Union and Southern Poverty Law Center believe the new initiative violates several U.S. and international human rights laws. And Kate Smith joins me now. She's a CBS News digital reporter. Kate, thanks so much for being here. Explain for our viewers how exactly this new policy is a departure from the old one.
So prior to when this was implemented in January, asylum seekers would be able to freely cross the border, present themselves legally at a port of entry, and then claim asylum. And then, while they waited for a judge to rule on that, they would be allowed to stay in the United States under supervision while they stayed with the sponsor. After this policy was implemented, they are now forced to wait in Mexico and then only be shuttled back to the United States for those specific court hearings.
So what laws do the ACLU and the SPLC believe that the Department of Homeland Security is actually violating here?
There's a handful of laws that they believe that they're violating here, but the big one is the 1980 Refugee Act. And it specifically says that the United States is not allowed to send back an individual who believes they fear persecution in their home country. The United States is not allowed to do that under this nearly 40-year-old act. And so that is really what they're going in on.
And so both President Trump and Secretary Nielsen have said that asylum seekers rarely show up for their court dates, and that's a major motivating factor for this new policy. So what is the actual picture that we see when it comes to asylum seekers? Do they show up for their court dates?
Yes, by and large that they do. And I'd love to note that when Nielsen announced this policy in congressional testimony, she said that more often than not, these asylum seekers do not show up to their court date. The reality is DOJ data says 89%. So it's a huge departure. President Trump has specifically said 3%. So again, these are huge departures between what one government agency is saying and what these heads of other agencies are saying.
89% of people do actually show up for their court dates.
Precisely.
Wow.
And what's so problematic about that is you have policies like Remain in Mexico that are based off of these completely false stats.
So then how is Mexico reacting to this policy change?
That's a great question. So when it was first announced in December, there was a little bit of confusion on the Mexico side. It appeared as if they were not briefed that this was happening. You saw some officials, specifically in Tijuana, saying that they just didn't have the capacity for it. And in speaking to immigration attorneys that volunteer in Tijuana, they've told me that there simply is not space for more migrants in Tijuana. After it became implemented, we listened in on a press conference that they held in Mexico City. Officials at that point in time said that they would be complying with the new law, but that they didn't agree with it. And they made a point of saying that they did not agree with this law.
Well, then, based on what we know, does it seem like a lawsuit will actually prevent this policy from being implemented any further?
Well, they're not seeking an injunction. So that means that tomorrow, when someone crosses the border seeking asylum, they will still be subject to remain in Mexico. However, in the future, that might be reversed. And then for those plaintiffs, they might not have to wait in Mexico any longer.
All right, I know you'll continue to watch it. Kate Smith, Kate, thanks so much.